This is the multiple award-winning GardenDC podcast, the podcast about everything gardening in the Mid-Atlantic region and beyond. I'm your host, Kathy Jentz. I'm the editor of Washington Gardener magazine. Our content is aimed at gardening enthusiasts, people who grow everything from edibles to ornamentals, natives to exotics. If it grows in our area, that's what we talk about. Welcome to episode 269 of the GardenDC podcast. In this episode, we talk with Michael Judd of Ecologia Design about all the nut-bearing trees we can grow in our region. The plant profile is on azaleas, and we share what's going on in the garden, as well as some upcoming local gardening events in the What's New segment. We close out with a last word on what to grow with beets by Christy Page of Green Prints. I grow a kind of tree nut that Michael and I don't discuss in his interview. Be sure to listen to the end of the episode for that. This episode, we're joined by Michael Judd of Ecologia Design. Welcome back, Michael.
Thank you, Kathy. Always enjoy talking to you.
Great to have you back on. So Michael is returning guest. We had him on episode 95 of the GardenDC podcast talking all about willows. And before that, talking about Paws. This time we're having you back to talk about nut-bearing trees.
Yeah, I love the diversity that we're able to cover. And of course, I love talking about all my favorite plants. So this is a real great opportunity for me, a pleasure.
Great. Before we dive into all things nuts, how about we talk a little bit about what you've been up to, Michael, since the last time we had you on, which was way back March 2022.
Wow, that's a journey back. Lots. My life always has lots going on. My most recent doings have been to create a natural green burial site here in Frederick County, where we're at in Maryland. And interestingly enough, it's located on a nut orchard. So I've been stacking my interests and functions to bringing everything sort of full circle with the trees and with our lives, and the feeding of those systems through our lives. So I've been able to successfully create sort of a public natural green burial site over the last many years. And that's definitely been my focus since 2022, aside from my growing family and, of course, all of my other plantings and teachings and doings in the world. So, yeah, that's the nutshell.
Yeah, and I know that the natural burial site, the website is morrisorchardnaturalburial.com for people who are interested in that. And we'll definitely have you back on the podcast to talk all about natural burials, because I think that is a super fascinating topic. Maybe garden tangentially related, right?
Sure.
I still think super, super interesting, even for us gardeners. And many of us would be interested in learning that that was even available to us for when we pass on. And I also wanted to note that you host the annual Paw Festival that is going gangbusters. I hear lots and lots of great things about that.
Yeah, our annual this year will be our 11th annual Paw Fest here at our homestead, it's a great experience. I mean, obviously for the Paw, for trying all the different cultivars, seeing our diverse plantings of Paws, Paw ice cream, everything Paw. But it's also an opportunity to come and see our site, which is a permaculturally designed homestead, which basically means it's really diverse. We've got lots of species, all planted quite intimately. It's sort of like an edible botanical garden. And of course, our home, which is a circular straw bale home. And the whole design is a great experience. So people, they come for the Paws, but then they get a much larger experience. And they love it. Yeah, it sells out every year. Just people are excited about this tropical fruit of the north. And we're giving them a great experience for it.
And we'll definitely have a link to that episode on Paws. So anybody who's interested in that can check the show notes for that link, and to your website if they're interested in signing up for this year's Paw Fest, which I'm imagining that will open up soon for registration.
Yes, I just opened it up. So typically it starts in January. The tickets go on sale, and I do early bird tickets. which are less expensive for those in the know. Ideally, those who are on my email list. So if you do go to my site, sign up for my email list so that you're getting the heads up, especially this year because there's going to be an episode on Maryland Public Television's, was it Farm and Harvest show?
Mm-hmm. Love that show.
Yeah, they came out and did filming of our site and then of our Paw Fest. So they're gonna be including that. Probably gonna come out in March of this year, and so that's gonna probably really cascade a lot of interest and maybe sell everything out much earlier. But then I also often will do a sort of a more personal tasting and tour in September, which is the main harvest month in our region for Paws. So if the fest sells out, oftentimes I'll have another event or two around it to come and have a Paw experience. And if you miss all of that, of course, my book on Paws, for love of Paws, and I have lots of online coursework around Paws. So I got everyone covered. Just come to our site and you'll get pawpawed.
And I would say I brought a group of garden writers, members of GardenCom, to visit your homestead once, and they were fascinated. So I think it's for all levels, for people who are just exploring and thinking about maybe adding 1 or 2 pawpaw trees to their home garden, all up to people who are like, how can I make this where I live, like a food forest?
Right. We definitely need 2 at least for the cross-pollination. So
for
2
sure.
or more the merrier.
Or somebody nearby with one. If you're in a small urban garden, maybe you're like can talk a neighbor into it.
Or plant 2 together, like about 18 inches apart. Let them grow up as one tree and cross-pollinate each other. You can do that with a lot of fruit and nut species if you have limited space.
Great idea. All right, so let's dive into all things nuts. And we'll start off with nut that I personally haven't eaten, I don't think. It's the hickories. And I would say I've seen plenty of hickory trees, but I don't think I've ever consumed their seeds.
Well, part of the reason for that is a lot of sort of your wild, unselected hickories are very thick-shelled. I mean, they are so thick. They are one of the hardest shells. So to get to the actual nut inside, which is very rich, creamy, oily, absolutely delicious. I mean, think pecan. I mean, a pecan is a hickory. So, the other hickories, the shell bark and the shag bark particularly, have delicious nuts. Now, like with most things, fruits and nuts, the genetics are really important. And fortunately, we've had a lot of focus and work done on nut trees. The Northern Nut Growers Association is one of the leaders in this, keeping it alive, keeping the culture of nuts and nut selection alive. Through that organization and other sort of hobby growers mostly, we've been able to identify what are some of the best in the wild. And when I say the best, these are characteristics that would be a thinner shell, a larger nut meat inside, less compartments inside. So when you crack that nut open, you're actually easily releasing the nut. Of course, productivity and tree health. But when you put those together with shag and shell bark hickories, you're getting delicious nuts that are easier to crack. And, you will just be blown away by how delicious they are. Now, I will say, for all those unselected hickories that are out there, because there's lots of those, we're fortunate to have an abundance of them in our region. The saving grace for those is what's called hickory milk. And this is a great thing to do with those nuts, is to, sort of just smash them, get them in a bag, run over them with your car, smash them with a hammer. It doesn't matter. You're not going to be picking out the nut meat from the shell. You're going to take the nut meat in the shell and you're going to simmer it on your stove for, half an hour, 2 hours, 2 days. You can leave it there and just let it simmer, and it is absolutely delicious just the way it is, because it has kind of a high oil content. So it comes out as like a very sort of rich milk to drink. Of course, you could add, a little bit of maple syrup, a little bit of cinnamon to that. And it is just so warming and delicious. So if you don't have these select nuts, or if you're planting them and you're waiting many years for them, Go out and harvest the ones that you do have around you and make hickory nut milk. It is amazing, and it warms you and feeds you, and people love it. So, yeah, remember that trick. Now, I will also add in another lesser known but becoming very popular because it is high in oil content, and that is the bitter nut hickory. We're trying to change the name of that. It's also called yellow bud hickory.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, bitter nut is not the best advertisement.
No, it's not. But so one of the great things about the yellow bud hickory is that it has a very thin shell and it has a very high oil content, upwards of like 80%, So when it gets pressed, which presses very easily, you can press, the shell and the nut together, you're getting this absolutely delicious oil that tastes like liquid pecans. And if you think about the oils we're eating in our, diet these days, they're coming from afar typically, or they're coming from, an agricultural system that's really not serving the landscape or our bodies. A lot of these seed oils, or if we're buying, olive oil and stuff from other far, we actually are growing, the oils around us in tree crops. So when we can eat more of our diet and food from the tree crops around us, number one, we're eating more nutrient dense food, and then we're supporting that sort of perennial agriculture, which supports our environment. So, it's this win-win-win, and bitter nut hickory is amazing for this. And there are these little nut hubs popping up all over the place in the Northeast and starting here in the Mid-Atlantic and across the country, where individuals and nonprofits and groups are coming together and sort of processing nuts together and buying these oil presses. A lot of times they're coming from Germany. The Germans typically are way advanced when it comes to forestry and technology and food processing. So there's some really great oil presses that are coming out of Germany that these nut hubs are buying and collectively gathering the nuts and pressing oil. Anyway, for me, it's pretty exciting, sort of, renaissance of working with these tree crops all around us.
Yeah, I know you started silvoculture.org, and that's SILVO culture.org. And can you tell us a little bit about that? And is that where you are sharing maybe some resources? Maybe one person has an oil press, or you're having classes, or how and when and why did that start?
Yes. So silviculture was born out of a vision that I had in 2019 of really seeing these fields around us that are corn and soy actually being, these nut orchards. So my main focus in most all of my work and with silviculture is on chestnuts. Now, not the American chestnut, but productive chestnuts. And we can dive into this deeper. For our region, that is the Chinese chestnut, which is very blight resistant, very productive, delicious nuts. An absolute all-star. So if we could transplant, the corn, which is, the main thing that we're growing on our landscapes, by using chestnuts. Chestnut is also nicknamed the bread tree. But anyway, I don't want to go too far in the rabbit hole right away. So silviculture was born out of a vision of really starting to transform our landscapes, ideally on a larger scale, so that we're not using this annual agriculture, which is basically, eroding our soils, polluting our waterways, and not even really serving our bodies either. So it's like, okay, how do we create something that's realistic, that also is economically viable, so that we're not just, getting on a soapbox saying this is better. It's like, no, this actually can make you more money per acre and have all these other benefits at the same time. And that's silviculture in a nutshell, where our mission is to help plant 1 million nut trees in the Mid-Atlantic. And that's a diversity. We have gotten grants. We're working with, pretty large grants now from the DNR and other organizations, to where we're planting out these diverse food forest systems. So food forest, agroforestry, you can think of these as diversified orchards. We can dig into those definitions if you want, but basically we're planting out, these good genetics of different types of nut trees, sometimes fruit trees. The American persimmon is high on my list for being very valuable tree crop to plant for many reasons, very high sugar content. Of course, Paws and a few others, but really the nuts are what are economically viable and also really feed the ecosystem. So we can dive into that aspect of it, because part of my focus on nut trees is it's many things. It's long-term food security, it's economics, but then it's also the realization that nut trees are a keystone species in our healthy ecosystems. Keystone meaning without that stone, our systems will not function as they function. So if we did not have nut trees in our ecosystems, they would not be healthy and thriving as they are. They're that important, largely because they're feeding the wildlife. They're a huge part of the food chain. So the animals that are actually eating the nuts, and then the animals that are eating the animals that are eating the nuts, is a huge network. And that is a lot of what's maintaining our system and the diversity of life around us.
Yeah.
So the importance of the nut tree is huge, and more than I think most of us recognize. In some ways, it's similar to fungi. We're realizing how important fungi are in our healthy ecosystems, and how they are also a keystone, in healthy ecosystems. So are nut trees, especially here in the temperate north. And the indigenous peoples of the north always knew this and really maintained, the forest to be rich in nuts, and not just for harvesting and storing them, but for the wildlife that you could hunt and eat and rely on in the winters as well. So, the nut tree has so many critical points of support, and I see them being even more valuable in the future as our systems become more unstable. The nut trees are going to be needed. We're going to return to that consistency and importance of local nutrient dense food. So of course, what's the saying, what's the best time to plant a tree? 20 years ago, right? So right now is the time. In 20 years, our future is going to be quite different, and having stability of nut trees is only going to be a benefit. So that's another reason to be focusing, and why I started the nonprofit. And yes, silviculture.org is a wonderful place to go visit, learn a lot about different types of nuts. We do an annual chestnut roast. That's a great event, very educational. Our last one in 2025 in the fall, we actually, with your ticket, you got 6 trees. You got 2 bitternut hickories, you got 2 persimmons, and you got 2 chestnuts, select chestnuts as part of that. So you coming and enjoying yourself, but then also taking the genetics home and planting them. Because when we plant good genetics in our land, on our home, or around us, we're inoculating our entire region with better genetics. The squirrels will carry off the nuts. Humans will carry off the nuts. You planting them to start with will then create a cascade, a ripple effect of these genetics being grown in our area. And I can't tell you how important that is, and the effect that will have. To put it in a nutshell, planting nut trees is potentially one of the most valuable things we can do with our lives.
I agree, Michael. And I would say the American chestnut, which is pretty much extinct in the wild now due to the chestnut blight fungus, that was such a huge keystone species, right, in the eastern forest. And the loss of that almost overnight virtually just changed our entire region. And I would say what you're doing, that Million Nut Trees campaign, would be almost like a drop in the bucket, but a good drop in the bucket, right, for replacing what we lost over a century ago.
Right. And another great thing about the chestnuts is that they're annual bearers, and that's another a very, very important factor. A lot of nut trees are, biannual producers, so they'll produce every second year, some every third year. And so that can really affect the wildlife and the ecosystem. So the chestnuts, being an annual bearer of a very carbohydrate rich nut, is also a big supporter of the ecosystem every year. So obviously, having a diversity of your nuts is important, because the chestnut is, the bread tree. It's carbohydrate rich, almost has no oil in it, which allows it to be stored. You dry it, you can store chestnuts for years and it doesn't go rancid. So you combine that with we call that the bread tree. And then our butter tree would be like the bitter nut. So you got your bread and your butter in your trees, you're growing these key staple foods, and then the hazelnut. We can talk about hazelnuts because they're also very high in oil. The black walnut also has a decent oil content to it. So if we can think about when we're designing our environments and our plantings, we can have our carbohydrates and our oils and our nuts.
Yeah. And I do know that there are a few different breeding programs going on now to bring back a blight-resistant American chestnut. There are, of course, some hybrids with Chinese chestnuts that are out there now on the market, but maybe what you're doing probably is mainly growing that Chinese chestnut because it's more reliable at this point.
Yes, and I think in the future, the American chestnut, when it was productive, is a very small chestnut, quite tasty, but very small. And if we're looking practically about harvesting and creating a real food source, it's going to be hard to beat the Chinese chestnuts and their genetics. They produce large, very tasty nuts. And, when it comes to processing nuts, size does matter, and really actually making it, realistic to harvest and to utilize those. So, I'm not saying the American chestnut would be wonderful if there was a resurgence of it, but, I'm focused on what is working, what is needed, and what can we be doing, versus reaching into the past to try and bring something back.
So focusing on the Chinese chestnut, are there certain varieties that you recommend or cultivars?
Well, genetics. So with the Chinese chestnut, fortunately, there's been a lot of great work done on it. Again, over recent generations, really probably over the last 60 years, there's been a lot of leaps in it. I mean, the Chinese chestnut was here and being worked with before the American chestnut, declined. So its value was already noted and starting to be worked with, in the 1800s. But that work has really been carried forward in the last 60 years to where orchards have been specifically planted out for selection. So planting out seeds, of already the best known cultivars or just seedlings, and then growing those out and selecting the best of those, growing those out as an orchard, finding the best of those, growing those out as an orchard, to where we do now have a really amazing gene pool for our region. So there are cultivars. One of the challenges with the Chinese chestnut is the grafting is not always graft compatible, meaning that when you graft onto a rootstock of another Chinese chestnut, the grafting joint does not always heal well. It doesn't always join well. So it's more focused on the select seedlings, the improved seedlings. So in this case, if you're having good seedling chestnuts, that's a great way to go. A lot of other things I would encourage, using cultivars and grafted items, like with the hickories and the persimmons and the pawpaws. I would definitely be looking at grafted material for those, generally speaking. But with the Chinese chestnuts, you're going to get some good producers from getting the good select seedlings.
Mm-hmm.
And you can look for those select seedlings through a few different sources. Route 9 Cooperative in Ohio sells select seedlings. And is it Missouri State University has done a lot of land grant work on chestnuts and also has really good seed genetics to get from there. And new nurseries are starting to pop up with these improved genetics now as well. So yeah, does that answer the question?
Definitely. Yeah, I wanted to follow up on propagation in general with nut trees because, of course, you can just plant them, right? Of course. And I assume most of them come true to the mother plant. But also, you were talking about fastest to grow and maybe to how many years it will be till harvest.
Right.
So I'm more familiar with fruit trees in that you plant a pear seedling or, sapling, and then maybe 10 to 12 years, you're going to get your first fruit. And then 5 years after that, you're going to get your best harvest. So how would you rank the nut trees?
Well, they're going to be different by species. The chestnut are very precocious. The Chinese chestnuts can be producing in as little as 6 years and start to become very productive early in their age, which is wonderful. And that's just seedlings. That's not even grafted. So they're quick to produce and they're tough. They will take all kinds of site and soil conditions. They do need drainage. So not a wet site, but they've proven themselves to grow in very dry, poor soils, very exposed sites. So they're quite resilient in that way. Once established, they're quite drought tolerant. They're just very phenomenal adaptive species in general. Black walnuts are relatively fast growing as well. They are slower to come online as seedlings. It could be 8 upwards of 15 years sometimes. And that's probably more of an average for most of your seedling nut trees. 8 to 15 years. Hickories are infamous for sometimes being, 15 to 20 years from seedling. But again, if you're working with grafted, trees, material, then you could be getting your first nuts, in 6-7 years of planting. The grafted, when you graft something, you often speed up the production time. So there's some different nurseries for getting good nut genetics that I'll throw out there. One is Grimo Nursery. That's Grimo Nursery. He's up in Ontario, but ships here into the U.S. no problem. And Rockbridge Trees. I believe he's in Tennessee. He has really good tree genetics, nut trees, and a few fruit trees. And he really excels and has some of the best collection of northern pecans, which we can segue into because the northern pecan, so we're in the northern range. Pecans really began way up in the Mississippi Valley. They began, in the north, and they grow down into the South. And of course, the ones in the South were commercialized, and that's how we know them better. And they are a little bit larger down South, but we can easily grow. And northern pecans, are naturally adapted to our region. But you need to get the right genetics for our region. You can't just go from any old catalog and start buying pecans because they're mostly for the South. But someone like Rockbridge Trees has selected and understands and knows the best genetics for the North. Then on top of that, you have to have the right type of genetics for cross-pollination, the right cultivars to cross-pollinate. So you can't always just plant a couple of pecans and hope that they're going to work pollination-wise. They've got a little bit of a complicated pollination going on. But when you go to a site like Rockbridge Trees, and you look at their offerings for different grafted northern pecans, it'll say, make sure you get this one with that one. And you could plant, at least a pair of those, and that you're going to be getting, some delicious northern pecans. Of course, if you have more space and you're willing to work with seedlings, I'm not discouraging that, but limited space, I always say get the best genetics and maximize that space that you're using and the attention you're giving to your trees versus getting something for free, getting something without much research. The real input when you're planting a tree is the space and is the work and the care to get it going. So really invest in making sure that you're planting the best you can get.
I think that's great advice. GardenDC will be back after this short break.
Get low-maintenance alternatives to lawns with Ground Cover Revolution by Kathy Jentz. Reducing the lawn is among the biggest trends in homeownership, with an endless stream of homeowners looking for an eco-friendly alternative to a traditional turfgrass lawn. In the last few years alone, over 23 million Americans converted part of their lawn to a natural landscape, and now they're looking to do even more. The biggest challenge to adopting this new ideal of the perfect lawn? Knowing how and when to replace your turf and which plants are the best ones for the job. Ground Cover Revolution is here with all the answers you need, and some you didn't even know you needed. Included are 40 in-depth profiles of plants that are perfect choices for replacing a grass lawn. There are options for sun, for shade, for dry and wet sites, and for various climates around the globe. There are choices that bloom, options that are evergreen, and selections that are deer resistant. Kathy Jentz has also included an incredibly useful chart that gives you all the specifics on each of the 40 choices for quick reference and to make your ground cover selection process even easier. Whether you want to replace the entire lawn or just reduce the amount of land dedicated to turf, Ground Cover Revolution will help you usher in a new and improved idea of what a beautiful lawn should be. Ground Cover Revolution is available now wherever you buy books, including Amazon.com and Bookshop.org.
All right, listen up, nacho chips. Quiet down, crispy potatoes. This is the moment Velveeta's been preparing you for, and you're not about to crack under pressure. Today's the day to go all in on the drip. Velveeta's Heat and Eat Queso is the MVP of any game day spread, so stick by them, and you'll be golden. Now get out there and make delicious history. No tailgate party is complete without Velveeta.
So we talked a bit about northern pecans, the American chestnut and Chinese chestnut. Let's turn to the walnut. So there's American walnut and black walnuts. Is that interchangeable?
No, those are different. Those are different. And I really only focus on the black walnut, knowing that, again, what is abundant and productive in our region. So I'm not intimate with the American. I think it's sometimes called the white walnut, if I'm not mistaken. And of course, the English walnut does not prosper in our region. I will just put that out there because you look at a nursery catalog and it talks about disease resistant, these. I've yet to find a healthy, productive, sort of English European walnut growing. The trees are around here. I see people plant them and they'll grow and actually survive. They get diseased really easily, but I never see any nuts. I'd love to be proven wrong on that because, of course, the English walnuts are the ones we're very familiar with in the stores, thin shells, big, tasty, nut halves in there. But the Mid-Atlantic is funky. I love it. It's humid. It's a great growing climate, but you need to align to that with your species selection or you will struggle.
Definitely. And I think the black walnut is very familiar to anybody who grew up in this region or lives in the Mid-Atlantic as those green snake balls, but not to be confused with the Osage orange, right?
Correct. Yeah. They're abundant here. They love our climate. They're often found, sort of just off the floodplains. They do like drainage, but they also like it moist and rich. So you'll usually find them, in those lower parts that drain, ideally out of strong winds. But, they seem to like it rich and moist. And they thrive in those environments. They're tough. You'll find them other places too, but they thrive here. And so most of the black walnuts we know of are not selected. And like the hickory, they can have a very thick shell. And by the time you eventually crack into that, they're very small compartments inside with, each little small compartment's got a little bit of nut meat that you're really going to have to work hard to get out. Now you compare that to a select black walnut, you're going to have a thinner shell, so much easier to crack. Inside, you're going to have, larger compartments where the nut meat will fall out more easily and you'll have bigger chunks. So again, the black walnut selecting for the good genetics is really important, and they're delicious. They're so good. The black walnut is so flavorful. I love fruits and nuts that really pack a lot of flavor. You like the black currants? Oh man, that's my favorite because they're so, they give so much and they value add into, when you make things with them. Most people know like what? Chocolate chip cookies with black walnuts in them is delicious. When you add black walnuts into something, you are really tasting it.
Banana bread with the walnuts, always good.
Oh, we're going to get hungry here. We're hungry.
And that could be pawpaw bread, not just banana bread.
That's right. How about pawpaw black walnut bread? But most people are not familiar because it takes so much work to do it. You can buy black walnuts in the store. There's like one place, I want to say it's maybe in Missouri, Hammond's. They have sort of a large processing center for black walnuts, and they buy black walnuts from just everywhere, whatever kind you got, foraged, and that's kind of a cool model. And they go ahead and process those into oil. The shell, the black walnut shell is used it's used a lot in cosmetics. It's used a lot in machinery as sort of an abrasive cleaner. Obviously it can get refined down for cosmetics, or it can be used to clean machinery. So that thick shell actually is utilized a lot. But if we're talking about what we can eat, you want the improved genetics. Sometimes that, the black walnut seedlings are pretty decent as far as what we call true to heredity or true to seed. You mentioned earlier, coming close to their parents. And that's going to be variable between species. You can't just say wholesale, nuts are going to do that. But species to species, they're going to be very much like, or maybe not too much like their parents. Black walnuts are more in that direction of, hey, if it comes from an orchard that is like all really good black walnuts, those seeds, which are called select seedlings, they're not cultivars, they're not named, but they're coming typically from cultivars and named trees. Those are probably going to give you a pretty decent tree. And I know Burnt Ridge Nursery sells select black walnut seedlings. I'll often buy their seedlings for $5 or $10 a piece, just so I have plenty of good genetics on hands for my different projects. So you can get those pretty inexpensively from them. Grafted black walnuts are a little tricky in the sense that it has that tap root. And if you're buying a grafted tree, that means it's been in a pot probably for 3 years, or it was dug up, after being alive for 3 years. And that damage to the root is really tough on them to reestablish. So you are potentially buying a grafted tree that would die when you're buying grafted nut trees in general. Rock bridge trees I mentioned down there, they do sell like 2 and 3 gallon trees that have done pretty well for me. They grow them out in sort of a larger sort of air pruning bag. So that might be one of your better bets. But I always like to buy my trees and plant my trees small, young. Buying bigger is not better when it comes to trees. Yeah, that's a big one.
Yeah, I would say get them in their location as quick as possible and let them grow, and they'll catch up with what you would have bought. A 2 or 3 year old tree will catch up quickly once you start it in the right place.
And they'll be healthier.
And healthier, definitely. And I was going to mention with the black walnuts, of course, a lot of home gardeners' concerns would be black walnut trees get big, they're going to shade out things, but more than that, they have the juglans in their root zone, so it makes it really hard to plant anything below a black walnut tree.
Well, I've got a couple things to say about that. One is that actually they have a very dappled light, which makes it actually good for your lawn underneath or growing things underneath. And I'll give you a long list of things that grow with black walnut. It's really interesting. Like when I do a design, if like I'm doing a site layout for a house or something for a new homestead or something, and they're very open to the south, I will recommend planting black walnuts facing south, because their leaves come on late. So you're trying to get, usually when you're doing like, a passive solar house or, somewhere where you're really maximizing that sun intake, especially in the wintertime, you want to maximize the winter sun and then you want shade in the summer. The black walnut leaves out late and it drops its leaves early. So if you're looking at doing a passive design, they will maximize that winter and spring sun, and then they'll give you the summer shade, and then they'll let in that fall and that winter sun really nicely. So that's an aside, but that's a cool design aspect of the black walnut that I like. But their shade is dappled, and you can grow a pretty nice lawn underneath black walnuts. Mind you, you're going to have these green bombs dropping everywhere, so keep that in mind.
Mm-hmm.
We have like a 300-year-old black walnut in front of our family home, and it's gorgeous. It's huge. But it's like boom, 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 like every fall. You got to watch your head and your cars and everything. But a lot of things grow with black walnuts. The black walnuts have been given an exaggerated bad rap for things that can grow with it. And that's mostly because, tomatoes and apples don't really grow well with it. And that's what most Americans like to grow. But there are so many things. I grow persimmons with black walnuts. I grow mulberries with black walnuts. I grow gummies with black walnuts. I grow pawpaws with black walnuts. I grow currants with black walnuts. I grow so many things with black walnuts. So I really do encourage you to dive deeper into those lists of what does and doesn't grow with black walnuts, because tons of things do. And it's actually not too many that don't.
Great. And let's talk about hazelnuts now.
Ooh, yeah.
So I'm a huge fan, Michael, of hazelnuts and chocolate. Very German combination, so good. And Nutella, nothing could be better to me. So I've attempted a couple of hazelnut bushes and wanted to know, could they be pruned into a tree form? What is your advice on growing hazelnuts locally?
Okay, number one is what you plant. It always starts with what you plant. Fortunately, in recent years, Rutgers University has released disease-resistant, large nutted. We're talking like the ones you're talking about in Nutella. Those are European hazelnuts, which we haven't been able to plant the European here because of a blight. The American hazelnut, yes, it's a small nut. It's not consistent. You get a lot of blanks. It's just not been dependable, at least on sort of certainly going up to a commercial scale. It's not been viable for our region at all. But there's been a lot of work done by Rutgers University in relationship with a few other universities, Oregon State University being key among them, because Oregon State University did a lot of the work to bring in the hazelnut industry that's in Oregon and has been thriving in Oregon now for decades. They're able to grow the European hazelnuts. They're starting to have some issues out there now too, but the pollination, the flowering, it's complicated with hazelnuts, the disease resistance. But the long and short of it is Rutgers has released 4 or 5 cultivars of hazelnuts just in the last couple of years, so that we now have access to planting some of the best hazelnuts for our region. I think this is very exciting, especially for hazelnut lovers. And so check out Rutgers University's, the nursery I mentioned earlier, the Rock Bridge Trees, also does sell these hazelnuts in larger size, a little more expensive than you might find elsewhere if you're Googling them. Other nurseries are starting to sell the Rutgers releases, smaller size, less expensive. So look around. And you want to make sure that you're, again, combining the cultivars for cross-pollination. Don't just buy 1 or 2 randomly. Make sure you're getting a couple of the pollinators, and they will specify when you're buying them, the couple of pollinators you want to go together with them. Because the hazelnuts do like to sort of wind pollinate close to each other. So you got to think about, ideally you plant them a little bit more of like a block so that you're really getting good pollination going. You really need to think about and learn a little bit about the pollination with hazelnuts, making sure that you're going to get what you were hoping out of it. And I also mentioned that, if you live around trees, you're probably not going to get any nuts. The squirrels are going to eat all of your hazelnuts. People that are successfully getting hazelnuts are typically growing them where there's like 100-foot open area between the hazelnuts and any trees. That's that open area where squirrels won't cross because of predators. So just so you know, grow them, but don't, know the realism that you may not harvest your hazelnuts because squirrels are going to love them. And that's great. Feed wildlife, feed them the best genetics you can.
Yeah.
They appreciate it too. They're going to appreciate those big productive nuts. So when I'm talking about select genetics, this wildlife's going to love it too. You're selecting the best food for them as well.
I would say that has been my exact experience, Michael. Squirrels got to them first. Any nuts that we do have on the hazelnuts. Do you have any advice other than, plant the hazelnut in the middle of a clearing, but with nut trees in general, we want to share with the wildlife, but we still want some for ourselves. So I would say deer and other wildlife, maybe getting it above the browse line by pruning.
Yes. I definitely, for all my nut trees and things, my fruit trees, I use Plantra tree tubes. So Plantra tree tubes are a new generation of tree tubes. They're phenomenal. The growth increase, the strength of your trees is notable. They're not like the old green tubes, sometimes called death tubes. These have technology that really allows the trees to grow strong. I can send you a link for those as well. And yeah, bushes are tricky. And this goes back to your question, do you grow them as a single trunk or a multi-stem? Hazelnuts typically like to grow as a multi-stem shrub, sometimes getting, 15 plus feet tall. They can get really big. Of course, you can maintain them at a different height and prune them. But if I like to design for neglect, think that, your best wishes may never occur. You're going to have a 15, 20 foot shrub. So it's big, vigorous, strong growers, very tough. So the hazelnut in Europe and in most of the commercial orchards are grown as single trunks, sort of what we call a tree hazel. And a lot of that's for harvesting purposes and machinery. That's the main reason it's done that way. The shrub has a lot of benefits, obviously, is more habitat. That's more suited to hand picking. But yeah, the deer browse is tricky because deer will eat the hazelnuts. I see people saying that the deer don't eat them. And I'm like, no, they do. It depends on your deer pressure. But if you're in the mid-Atlantic, you've probably got high deer pressure.
Mm-hmm.
Or if you have things fenced off, then, you're okay. You don't have to worry about that. Tree tubing them up to 6 feet tall and having them branch out. I need to experiment with that because I've done that with elderberries. Believe it or not, I have tree elderberries because I have to. I've got a herd of deer that live here, and trying to fence around a shrub is it sucks.
Yeah.
It's not worth it.
And I would say the other consideration is you get it above the browse line, but then you have to get on a ladder to harvest. So that's the same thing with the fruit trees and nut trees is you don't want it to be such a high harvest that you have to get on a ladder, but you also don't want it to be within deer browsing. So there is that trade-off in there.
There is that trade-off. With the hazelnuts, I give them fencing for about the first 3 years. Once they're about 3 feet tall, they grow really strong and they'll pretty much outgrow the deer browse. It's not deer's favorite. So that, depending on your browse, they can really start shooting and really get past, the deer browse. So the hazelnuts, don't necessarily need to be fenced consistently, but yeah, that is a bit of a challenge. And it's hard to, really keep the wildlife off of everything. And I don't really want to keep the wildlife off of everything. I'm not a huge fan of fencing things out. If you can, plant more. Yeah, I went to a nursery once up in New England, and he'd found a trick where he took like a 4-inch PVC pipe about 4 feet long, put a cap on one end, and hung it in a tree. I sort of got a piece of rope and hung it in a tree. And the squirrels would go and pack their nuts in there, thinking they had the best place in the world to be packing their nuts. And then after they had done that, he would say, "Thank you very much." And he would just take that down and he would have all the nuts that the squirrels had taken. So I thought that was kind of a cool, neat trick. Not so great for the squirrel, but clever.
Yeah.
Clever.
I would say, yeah, that having squirrels harvest for you is an ideal situation.
Pretty smart.
Again, not for the squirrel. So in our last few minutes, I wanted to ask you some maintenance advice for your tree nuts. And first would be any pruning tips, and then do you fertilize them at all, any of the varieties?
So I'm a big fan of early pruning to shape. So shaping is a type of pruning that happens when trees are young. And it's quite helpful to establish a framework for any tree, fruit tree, or nut tree that you tend to work with or harvest from, even if you don't really intend to do a whole lot with it. By creating a framework for it that allows for more airflow and more light penetration is very helpful. And typically that's, when it gets to about 6 feet tall, when it gets out of that tree, the deer browse for us is when I will usually snip. If I have just a whip, if I have just one tall central leader, I will usually cut it around 6 feet tall, and usually in the dormant season, and that then will send out new sprouts. I'll let them grow. The next winter, I'll come along and I'll usually select 3, maybe 4 in different cardinal directions, right? And I'll thin everything else out. That then establishes what's going to be your future framework. And that early shaping makes all the difference for when you come back for future pruning, if you even come back. Then your future pruning is more simple. It's like, okay, I'm cutting things that are growing into the center out. Your pruning is set up for you or for somebody else to be able to do that doesn't really understand too much about pruning. You create a framework. So I'm a big fan of establishing a framework. So I'll do that. So, and then if space is important, I maintain and, will prune things, a lot. That allows you to put more in a small space. In some ways, it can also keep your trees healthy and vigorous, because you're stimulating new growth, which also often stimulates new fruiting buds. And it gives you the material that you could then use to graft new material with. So when I'm pruning, I'm collecting my scion wood, grafting wood for giving to other people, selling out into the world, regrafting my own trees. I'm always stacking my functions when I'm pruning like that and propagating at the same time. So I'm a fan at least of early shaping. If that's all you do, great. Fertilizing, let the leaves stay if you can. Removing leaves from your property is not serving your trees at all. You are moving their natural fertility, their phosphorus, their potash, their organic matter. Breaks my heart to see all these leaves. The only thing these trees have to feed themselves is being taken away. And if you have to take them away, find another way to come back and feed your trees with mulch, deep, wide mulch. Mulch is the key. If that's wood chips, I love wood chips. Wood chips, whatever works for you. If that's aesthetics, fine, buy mulch, but be generous with it. Your mulch, your organic matter is creating fungal networks. Your trees thrive with fungal networks. Trees have evolved in forest ecosystems, rich in organic matter, rich in fungal networks, which support the tree's health. And when you have lawn and you don't have fungal networks established, the trees don't have that support and it weakens them. So one of the best things we can do is create fungal-rich environments for our trees, which means consistent organic matter. Their own leaves, mulch, wood chips, straw, cardboard, you name it. Feed that soil, ideally out to the drip line. And in that sense, you're helping take care of that tree without having to do a lot of other inputs. Organic matter really is the key to keeping them healthy. It holds more moisture. It does so many things for you to keep your trees well.
Advice. Final question for you, Michael. If you have a tiny urban lot or maybe a small townhouse backyard, what would be the one nut tree you would recommend they grow?
Oh my gosh, what a question. Oh, I would be tortured. Jeez. Like I said, I'd probably do 2 trees 18 inches apart. So if it was me, I'd probably plant 2 Chinese chestnuts 18 inches apart, and they would grow up and cross-pollinate each other. Mind you, chestnuts do have spiky burrs, so you have to keep that in mind when and where you plant them. But they're such beautiful trees, and they're so tough as well. They'll take lots of conditions. So, gosh, that's a tough one. I would be tortured to make that decision. But I would probably go with the chestnuts, also because the squirrels and things can't get at them in those spiky husks. So you have one of the best chances to actually harvest your nuts with chestnuts. They'll get to them eventually, but you have just as good a chance of getting out there and getting your nuts. So yeah, it's hard to beat chestnuts.
Thank you so much, Michael.
It's been a pleasure. As always, I look forward to more conversation about more species in the future with you.
GardenDC will be back after this short break.
In the book The Urban Garden by Kathy Jentz and Terry Spate, you'll find dozens of inspiring and creative ways to grow flowers, shrubs, vegetables, herbs, and other plants in small spaces and with a limited budget. Whether you want to grow on a balcony, rooftop, front stoop, or a tiny urban patio, turn your growing dreams into reality and build a gorgeous and unique garden that showcases your personal style while still being functional and productive. With the genius ideas and resourceful tactics found here, you'll be maximizing yields and beauty from every square inch of your space. No matter what you grow, the 101 amazing growing ideas found in the urban garden will turn your tiny urban yard into a treasure trove of green you'll be proud to share with family and friends. Buy your copy today at your local retail bookseller or order it online now at Amazon.com or bookshop.org.
Azalea plant profile. Azaleas are flowering shrubs that are members of the rhododendron genus. They are native to North America, Asia, and Europe. Their flowers dazzle in shades of shimmering pinks and pale peaches to deep reds and pure white. Evergreen azaleas are in the subgenus Pentanthera, and deciduous azaleas are in the subgenus Tsutsutsi. They are generally hardy to USDA zones 6 to 9, though there are a few cold-hardy varieties available as well. You can put together a collection of early, mid, and late-season blooming varieties and have an azalea flowering in your garden for 6 months or more. And with the newer reblooming varieties, the flowering season can extend practically all the way through the year. Plant them in the fall or early spring in a part-sun location where they can attain their full size, and you will never need to prune them. They do not love to be in hot afternoon sun and prefer in acidic soil, but basically they are low maintenance and rewarding shrubs that can live over 100 years. If you do wish to prune them, do so right after they finish flowering so you don't cut off next year's buds. Remove dead or damaged branches at any time of the year. A mulch of pine bark, pine needles, or wood chips helps to keep moisture in the ground, even out changes in the soil temperature, and keep weeds out. Fertilize azaleas after their spring bloom using a slow-release acid-loving plant food, and water the fertilizer in well. Azaleas are easy to propagate from cuttings or by layering. Species azaleas can also be grown true from seed. Pollinators love azaleas. In particular, white blooming kinds attract nighttime moths, and red blooming ones attract hummingbirds. Azaleas are long cherished as symbols of spring and renewal. They are extremely popular landscape plants due to their brightly colored blooms, long-lasting flowers, and their ease of cultivation. 2026 is the year of the azalea, and April is Azalea Month. Find out more about azaleas at the Azalea Society of America's website, azaleas.org. Azaleas, you can grow that. What's new in the garden this week? Well, I'm enjoying the early season blooms of my witch hazels. I've started indoor seeds for catgrass for my kitties, and I have a orchid that I've coaxed back into bloom, and that's been really rewarding. In garden tips that we shared on our social media this week, we concentrated on winter blooming plants and winter garden tasks, including that you can take cuttings now from your red twig dogwoods, also your yellow ones, and it's their dormant season, so you can do so safely. Then push the stems into the soil about 4 nodes or bumps deep. They will soon root and make new plants. In gardening events, you might want to sign up for the winter webinar series hosted by GardenCom, the Garden Communicators International Association. This launched January 13th and runs through February 12th. It's a virtual series, so if you miss any of them, you can still watch the recordings. These are 10 expert-led sessions designed to help green industry professionals sharpen their skills, expand their audience, and grow their revenue in the year ahead. You can register for that series at info.gardencom.org. Another online Zoom virtual meeting you can attend is the Sunday, January 18th meeting of the Potomac Rose Society. That's at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. The topic is Knockout and Beyond, an exclusive afternoon with William Radler. You can find out more about that at potomacrose.org. And the Silver Spring Garden Club January meeting is also taking place online via Zoom. The topic is Mid-Atlantic Fruits and Berries. The speaker is author and permaculture designer Michael Judd, the guest on this episode. And you can find out more about that at Silver Spring Garden Club's Facebook page or at silverspringgardenclub.com. Also, during our recent winter break of the GardenDC podcast, we came out with the January 2026 issue of Washington Gardener magazine. Inside that issue, our cover story is on paper plant, Fatsia. We talk about how to grow pennyroyal, the herb, attracting a variety of birds to your garden, giving up on some of those natives that are super hard to start from seed, including teaberry, and getting ahead of that weed, winter speedwell. There's also a laurel wilt warning, our seed exchange registration form, photo contest guidelines, garden book reviews, our reader contest, and a profile of the Capital Area Food Bank's Zandra Coleman. We also talk about a new kale that's on the market this year to grow from seed in your vegetable garden, and make a visit to the Rehoboth Art League's garden. To read that and much more, go to washingtongardener.blogspot.com. Happy gardening!
This is Christy Page with Food Gardening Network with What to Grow with Beets, an article by Kim Matus. One of the many things I love about beets is the excuse they give me to grow some tasty beet companion plants. To be clear, I'm happy to have a garden full of beets just because I love them, but like tomatoes, which offer a great excuse to plant more basil, beets and several other plants work especially well together. Beets are relatively easy to grow and they mature quickly. In addition, they're a cool weather crop, so you can get 2 or even 3 harvests throughout the year. And you can store beets for quite some time in a variety of ways, from canning them to pickling them to burying them in a root cellar. Beets need between 45 and 65 days to reach maturity. So if you want to increase your beet harvest, plant new seeds every 2 to 3 weeks for a month or so, but only in regions where the high temperature tops out at 75 degrees Fahrenheit or less. Temperatures higher than that will cause your beet plants to bolt, rendering their roots too tough to eat and the leaves too bitter. So what can you plant with them? Well, companion planting matches plants with soil and nutrient needs that are different enough that they help rather than hinder the growth of both plants. Companion planting also helps add nutrients to the soil, reduce soil erosion, and shelter your beets from harsh weather and hot sun. Good companion plants can help attract beneficial insects, deter pests, from tiny insects to hungry herbivorous mammals like rabbits and deer. You'll still want to keep an eye out, however. And pests on your beets, well, left unchecked, they can damage and destroy your developing plants. Keeping a close watch on your plants during regular daily inspections will help you spot any pests before they do any harm. Healthy beets can bounce back from pest damage if you catch the pests quickly. So what are those companion plants? Well, first up, Brussels sprouts. Beets help enrich the soil, leading to fabulous broccoli, cabbage, and more, while Brussels sprouts just help everything along. Second, bush beans. Beets need plenty of sunshine, and pole beans can cast too much shade, but bush beans add nitrogen and nutrients to the soil. Lettuce. Beets and lettuce grow well together since they both enjoy the cooler weather. Mint. Mint can be both a good and a bad neighbor. It will grow in the worst of conditions. It attracts pollinators. However, mint will take over your entire garden if you aren't careful. Onions. Onions, along with other vegetables that have similarly pungent aromas, such as leeks and garlic, make good beet companions thanks to the fact that they repel several pests. Radishes. Radishes are some of my favorite beet companion plants. For one thing, you can plant a radish seed in the ground and then enjoy radishes in your salad in 3 short weeks. As far as their compatibility with beets, however, the fast-growing radishes can help loosen the soil for the slightly slower-growing beets. And finally, Swiss chard. This is a somewhat debatable choice. Swiss chard and beets are in the same family, so they have many of the same requirements around environmental preferences. They like cooler weather, plenty of sunshine, and moderately loose soil, so they do grow well together. The argument against growing these two close by is that they attract the same pests. And since you're expanding the dinner table for those pests, there's a greater chance they'll find your garden and have an unwelcome party with your plants. You really could go either way here. One trick I've learned about companion planting is that you don't have to stick to what is written. For example, mint is one of the best beet companion plants because its strong scent helps deter pests. That means that almost any other strongly scented herb will do the same. Basil, sage, and rosemary are all pretty good at keeping troublesome bugs away. Well, there you have it. This has been Christy Page with Food Gardening.
Thank you for listening to GardenDC. This episode was made by real humans. It was produced and hosted by myself, Kathy Jentz. The Let the Sunshine music interludes are by James Mulvaney. If you like this episode, you may also enjoy listening to GardenDC Podcast Episode 25, Paws, Episode 95, Willows, and Episode 187, Mad About Mulches. You can become a listener supporter by going to the link in our show notes. Another way to support this podcast is to subscribe to our monthly digital publication, Washington Gardener Magazine. To do so, go to WashingtonGardener.com or WashingtonGardener.blogspot.com. You can find Washington Gardener on Twitter or X, Instagram, Threads, Blue Sky, and Pinterest at WDC Gardener, and on Facebook at Washington Gardener Magazine. And be sure to leave us a 5-star review on your favorite podcast listening app. Please take a moment to share us on social media with hashtag GardenDC and with your gardening friends so other gardeners can find us too. The kind of tree nuts that I grow that Michael and I didn't discuss are acorns. I have both red and white oaks on my small little urban corner. They produce bumper crops of nuts sporadically, but have small crops most years. In my research, I found that the best oak trees to grow for nut production for human consumption are the white oaks. They have lower tannin content and taste less bitter and are easier to process. Also, bur oaks and chestnut oaks are good choices for their higher yields and larger, sweeter nuts. Processing acorns for flour is very labor-intensive, though it's fun to do once as an experience. I prefer to let my acorns provide essential food for wildlife visitors to my garden.